Zelensky in France, a step towards strengthening Ukraine's defense. The US is preparing the toughest sanctions for Putin's partners.
Any country doing business with Russia will face very tough sanctions. We can add Iran to this equation.
And Russian gas will be completely cut off for all of Europe.
American officials are traveling around EU countries demanding a complete rejection of Russian fuel and a switch to American energy sources.
The Greece-Ukraine gas corridor. A historic agreement has been signed.
As early as January, the first volumes of gas will flow from Alexandroupolis directly to Odessa. In
Poland, Sabotage. A railway section on the route to Ukraine has been damaged.
Most likely, the target of the explosion was to derail a train on the Warsaw-Dęblin line. There is no doubt. Are we dealing with an act of sabotage?
Central Asia no longer dances to the Kremlin's tune.
The region is officially closing the era of isolation, and it's doing so without Moscow's involvement. Essentially, Tokayev made it clear the region is becoming an independent player.
Innovations never cease to amaze. The pride of Russian aviation is falling apart before our eyes.
So, friends, urgent news from Paris. Zelensky and Macron have signed a special agreement that will significantly strengthen Ukraine, according to the document. Attention! Air defense systems, as well as missiles and hundreds of Rafale-type aircraft. As you can imagine, the Kremlin is on edge. The US is increasing pressure on Putin. Trump has announced very harsh sanctions against countries that continue to cooperate with Russia. That is not just against Russia itself, but also those who buy its energy resources. Meanwhile, the topic of peace negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow has returned to the information space. What all this could lead to, we discuss in the report. I am Alexander Prepodobny, waiting for you in the studio, and we will discuss everything with an expert.
Recep Erdogan will once again bring Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table. According to Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, negotiations between the warring sides are inevitable. And the only place acceptable to both countries is Istanbul.
I think that this war is now going through its worst phase because both sides are focused on destroying transport and energy infrastructure. Now it has turned into a drone war. No one can move anywhere. Only those who don't care about losses are advancing.
In addition, Vladimir Zelensky announced in his address his intention to resume negotiations with the Russians. We
are working to launch another round of negotiations so that there is at least some prospect of ending this war. And we are also counting on the resumption of exchanges. Many meetings, negotiations, phone calls, right now all for this purpose.
The first positive step towards possible negotiations was the agreement brokered by Turkey and the UAE on a large-scale prisoner exchange. According to the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, this concerns the release of 1,200 Ukrainians. Donald Trump is also counting on a swift end to the war. The US president believes that the sanctions imposed on Russian oil companies will motivate the aggressor to make concessions.
I hope this will happen soon. There is enormous pressure being put on India because it buys Russian oil. And thanks to this, they have money for the war. That's why I think this will end soon. In
the course of negotiations in Istanbul in the spring and summer of 2025, Moscow did not change its previous unrealistic demands on Kyiv, including denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine.
They are well aware of our position. As I have already mentioned before, they currently have our exact position in writing, as I have previously stated. There is absolutely nothing secret or hidden about it at all. It was stated by President Putin in June 2024 when he spoke at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Moscow's intentions can only be judged by its actions, and it has made it clear what it wants. It wants the rest of Donetsk region, and obviously Ukraine will not agree to this. Right now, we see that Russia continues to carry out long-range strikes on Ukrainian territory, obviously aiming to destroy its energy system and, so to speak, demoralize the country.
On the one hand, the Kremlin does not want to stop the fighting for negotiations. On the other hand, Russia is increasingly pressured by newly imposed sanctions against oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft, Ukrainian drone and missile strikes on refineries and ports, as well as Putin's reluctance to lose dialogue with Trump.
The Russians are now actively and persistently trying to somehow shake up this long-standing, deeply entrenched diplomatic ice, attempting to break it in various ways through different means and strategies in order to achieve their objectives. And let's say both formally through diplomacy and informally. Right now, they're working through the G7. through communication channels, they most likely tried to revive once again the Istanbul negotiation process. But in any case, the Russians are not ready to accept Trump's ultimatum. And Trump's ultimatum is very simple. Any political negotiations will only begin when the fighting stops.
At the same time, in reality, specifically on the battlefield, the Russian occupiers are only increasing the intensity and frequency of their assault operations. They continue to advance in the Donbas and Zaporizhzhia directions.
Vyacheslav Maltsev is joining our conversation, the chairman of the National Committee for the Fight Against Putin. Vyacheslav, hello, we're glad to see you.
Hello, thank you. I'm glad as well.
So let's discuss the following. Turkey is actively pushing the topic of possible negotiations between Putin and Zelensky. This is being discussed by genuinely high-ranking officials. For example, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Fidan. How do you assess the situation as of now? In general, do Putin and Zelensky have any real subject to discuss? Or is this all just Turkey's attempt to boost its own importance, first and foremost?
First and foremost,
there is a subject, essentially, and that subject is Ukraine. It's precisely because of this subject that the war is being fought. Putin wants all of Ukraine. Zelensky wants peace, or at least the people who, so to speak, are with him. That's what they say. Whether it's necessary or not, as they say, that's a third matter. You can't look into anyone's soul because, as you know, war excuses many things, so some things end up seeming absolutely wonderful. So honestly, I don't really see anyone making a strong effort for peace here. That is, there isn't this huge desire. Of course, it's declared, it's stated, and so on. For many reasons, Putin doesn't need peace right now. We won't even discuss that. Erdogan, to be honest, doesn't really need peace either. In fact, his influence will be greatest if Russia and Ukraine keep fighting endlessly. The longer the war goes on, the better for him. Right now, he's weaving his own very interesting, very elegant plot. He's bringing in Trump. He's brought in me, the Turkic peoples, and it's all coming together very well. Why? Because his idea, well, not just his, it existed before him, of the great Turan is taking shape, and quite seriously. In this case, China has, let's say, missed the mark a bit. In other words, they weren't prepared for the Turkic conspiracy. That's absolutely obvious. And this shows that they see the world a bit subjectively. Their preparations are less than ideal, and they make mistakes too. In other words, they're essentially working according to the same overly simplistic templates as any cumbersome bureaucratic system that lacks flexibility. So right now, basically, Trump is on top. It's Trump's time. Oh, Trump, Erdogan is on top. It's Trump's time. It's Erdogan's time. He's making use of both Trump and the Ukrainian conflict, the war in Ukraine. He's taking advantage of the situation in the Turkic republics, which right now, well, are actually under quite a bit of pressure from China. Inside those republics themselves, for example, in Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan, the Chinese are taking everything over, bringing everything under their control. And as you've seen, there have now been mass protests in Kazakhstan against the Chinese, against China's dominance. I think these are being fueled primarily by Turkish intelligence services and, of course, by Israeli intelligence as well. I have no doubt at all that they're working in this direction because they have serious interests in Kazakhstan's economy, very serious ones connected to uranium and other things, and that's why they're trying not to let go of this. China understands this perfectly well too, but it didn't expect that Erdogan would gather, well, actually not Erdogan, but Aliyev, yes. So it's believed that Aliyev gathered all the Turkic peoples, including even Tajikistan, which isn't a Turkic country, and they all went to Trump telling him he was the president of the world and all sorts of other nonsense. In reality, it's just a rather elaborate setup. Erdogan, for some reason, presents himself as an experienced politician. That is, lately he has been making mistakes, serious mistakes, and now suddenly all these mistakes have now turned out to be big advantages. Right now, Putin is in a very strange situation because he has no friends, only enemies. It's absolutely clear that China wants to absorb Russia, and Putin is only needed by them up to the point where some documents need to be signed for a final decision. After that, he won't be needed anymore. to stir up trouble in Europe and so on. In other words, as an adversary of China, he is a victim. Erdogan also needs him to achieve certain important goals, namely to obtain those territories in Russia that are sovereign. That is, Qatar, Bashkiria, Yakutia in general, all the Turkic territories, including Altai and Khakassia. And these are territories of sovereign Russia. So without the fragmentation of Russia, he won't get them. He understands this perfectly well, but he also knows that if Russia is not fragmented, then China will get all of Russia, and he, with his Turan project, will be left with nothing. Therefore, of course, he will not act in the interests of ending the war. Why end the war? A war inside Russia is needed so that it falls apart like a patchwork quilt.
Vyacheslav, I want to talk to you about Zelensky's visit to France. And first of all, about the signals we're getting from Paris. Let me briefly remind you. So first of all, Ukraine signed a declaration to strengthen Ukraine's defense. Zelensky and Macron. So essentially, this is what Ukraine is supposed to receive. 100 Rafale fighter jets, including SAMP-T air defense systems and artillery shells. And it's important that Macron said that Europe is not tired of the war in Ukraine. Please tell me it's clear that when they say not tired, it's primarily a response to those who claim they are tired. What do you think about such signals? What do they mean? And in general, how would you assess the current state of the main European countries in the context of supporting Ukraine? Do they understand that there is still a long way to go before the end, and maybe a very long way, in fact?
Well, let's put it this way. President Emmanuel Macron is currently showing quite a strong and determined character, I have to say. That is to say, in less than a year and a half from now, there will be important national elections, which he himself will not run in. Yes, but someone from his close political circle or inner team will likely be a candidate. And in this situation, there are major problems because in France, people have different attitudes toward the war in Ukraine, and he makes such a concrete, ironclad decision. Speaking of the Rafales, I have to say 100 Rafales, that's really something out of this world, an incredible force. You know, I fly a little myself on small motor planes, and twice in my life I've sat in the cockpit of a Rafale. And you know what I'll tell you, it's actually quite difficult and takes a long time to train a pilot to fly such an aircraft. Of course, it's more or less straightforward, apparently, but it also uses a lot of new systems that, for example, aren't present in the aircraft Ukrainian pilots trained on, like the Su-27, for instance. It's like night and day. So you have to sit in both cockpits. Well, I used to fly the MiG-29, and that's the aircraft Ukrainian pilots are flying now. And I can see just how different these machines are compared to the Rafale. That's why it takes time to learn. If Macron had provided 100 planes with pilots, well, then it would have been, of course, a whole different story, fun and, so to speak, impressive. Like Trump says about good deals. But as it is, I don't know. Learning to fly isn't like learning to fly a hang glider. Or basic training where a pilot flies for 15 hours and that's it. You can take off and land. Here you have to fight in wartime conditions where experienced people are operating air defense systems, and that's the main danger. The danger posed by air defense systems for an advanced aircraft like the Rafale is quite significant. So I think that what I would do in their place is to create some kind of specialized corps, perhaps something like a mercenary unit, put out a call and simply recruit experienced pilots for it. Basically, an aviation private military company where skilled mechanics are also needed, of course, because another very important issue is the ongoing maintenance of this aircraft. In other words, an ordinary mechanic won't be able to handle it. You need someone who knows what to do because there are a lot of specific nuances involved. So the simplest way here would be to immediately get the planes, the mechanics, the technicians, and the pilots. But for that, you need somehow formalize it. Why was it possible for Putin's people to create private military companies like Prigozhin's, but here in Europe, it's impossible to set up a private military company and instantly recruit these pilots? I think it's because of their love for war and for the sky, and combat pilots really love to shoot. They enjoy it so much. If a combat pilot switches to civil aviation, his mood immediately drops to zero if he can't do it. If he proves himself as a sniper pilot, flying out at least once a month and shooting for some reason from an airplane, then he already feels unimportant. He feels like a used up material. Therefore, indeed, I think there will be many people who would like to fly and, so to speak, fight for democracy. It would be easy to attract them. Let's see, because if
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
they'll currently distribute some planes, and while they train pilot technicians, I'm drawing a more or less favorable figure. It's about 8 months. Because we need to train mechanics, technicians, pilots, and gunsmiths, because they too must understand what kind of weapons they are dealing with.
Vyacheslav, let's discuss one more thing before we finish. I want to understand how much this Trump rhetoric, which follows Marco Rubio, who said there are no more sanctions left to expand, means when he says they will punish everyone who cooperates with Russia and does not comply with American sanctions. He even announced new sanctions against these countries. Please tell us, do you think Trump is really determined on this issue, or is it once again more rhetoric than reality? Well,
just shortly before that, you remember what happened. Orban came to visit and asked for permission to trade Russian oil. He was granted permission. And it also turned out that through Orban, FICO was allowed to do the same thing. In other words, they can easily bypass any sanctions, and they received official permission from the US. So it means that an agreement can be reached. And when people say about India or about other countries that now we're really going to crack down on them if they keep buying Russian oil, it's nothing more than an offer you can't refuse, a proposal to make a deal, to strike a good bargain. But again, what could Trump, let's say, actually offer India? The US economy has little influence on India. He could, let's say, impose sanctions against some other countries that cooperate with India, and that's it. And then a tangled mess would begin, one that would be easier to cut through than to untangle. It's a pointless endeavor. Yes, it's possible to reach an agreement with India so that India somehow a little bit to distance itself from China because it's gotten a bit too close and say, all right, go ahead and buy oil from Putin. That's all it's about, as you understand, not about someone refusing to buy oil from Putin. Someone will buy it anyway. There are plenty of people in the world eager to buy oil from Putin at a bargain. And I think one of the first will be American businessmen, who I believe will ultimately negotiate a deal with Trump and strike a good bargain with him.
very briefly, if I may, let me ask you about Orban. He has parliamentary elections coming up in 2026. He recently said in an interview that he doesn't care at all whether Russia wins or loses. So we will be building our own European security system here. Tell me, please, what could his opponents use against Orban to make him step away from affairs in the Hungarian state? He has
absolutely no chance of winning, neither Orban nor his party. The only reason he went to see Trump is because he needs huge amounts of money, and he'll have to rig the elections for that. Putin, with his so-called Volodin-style elections, will rig them, and they'll help him do it. As I understand it, in Hungary, you have to watch the elections very closely. I'm saying that now this is a common system. And of course, Orban isn't being honest, even with Trump. That's absolutely clear to see. For example, yes, he's supposedly Trump's best friend. Trump is handling financial matters in his interests. He actually went there for money for his party. It's obvious. Give me the opportunity to trade Putin's oil, to do some deals. Yeah, that's it. I'll make some money and everything will be fine. You'll have such a wonderful friend in Hungary. That's what this is about. But you understand that Orban can't serve just one master, Trump. At the very least, he has to serve two masters. Because on that side, China is also very strong. And if Orban doesn't, so to speak, let himself be stroked by China, he won't last long. He's now forced to play a shell game like this. Russia, China, and the USA. And who is he going to outplay there? I suppose that he will certainly outplay Trump, of course, because these comrades, well, I mean the Chinese specifically, it's hardly possible or even remotely likely for someone like Orban or someone like Fico to actually outplay them. They're not in the same weight class. Although if someone actually had the brains, they could outplay China. Thank you.
So much. Vyacheslav Maltsev, chairman of the National Committee for the Fight Against Putin, was on the air of Ukraine Today. All the best.
Thank you. Take care. Goodbye. Death to the tyrant, power to the people.
All the best. Thank you.